Before she ever wore a crown, Esther was a hidden girl in a foreign empire. Before her name was spoken in royal halls, before servants bowed before her, before the fate of an entire people rested on her courage, she was simply Hadassah, a Jewish orphan living far from the land of her ancestors. She had no throne to protect her, no father or mother to guide her, no army behind her, no reason to believe that kings, princes, and powerful men would one day wait for her words. Yet, in the quiet streets of Susa, in the heart of the Persian Empire, a story was already beginning to move. It was a story of danger and silence, a story of pride and courage, a story where the name of God is never directly spoken, yet His providence is seen in every turn, every delay, every sleepless night, and every moment that seemed like coincidence. Esther lived among the Jews who had been scattered far from Jerusalem. Their people had known exile. They remembered a homeland many of them had never seen. They carried the memories of temple, covenant, promise, and loss. They lived under foreign rule, trying to remain faithful while surrounded by the customs and power of another kingdom. The empire was vast. The throne belonged to King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, ruler over many provinces from India to Ethiopia. His palace stood in Susa, filled with wealth, guards, officials, feasts, and laws that could not easily be undone. In that world, power did not ask gently. Power commanded. Power displayed itself in gold, marble, wine, and royal decrees. Power could lift a person from obscurity or remove them without warning. And somewhere within that empire, Esther lived under the care of Mordecai, the cousin who had raised her as his own daughter. Mordecai was a Jew from the tribe of Benjamin. He lived near the king's gate, close enough to the center of power to see how the empire moved, but still belonging to a people who were not fully at home there. He had watched Esther grow. He had protected her. He had guided her, and he could not have known how much would one day depend on the young woman he had raised. The story begins not with Esther, but with a feast. King Ahasuerus held a great banquet in Susa. For many days, he displayed the riches of his kingdom and the splendor of his majesty before officials, nobles, princes, and servants. The palace was filled with signs of royal glory. Fine fabrics hung in the courts. Silver rings, marble pillars, golden couches, and rich colors surrounded the guests. Wine flowed freely, and the king's greatness was placed before every eye. It was not only a celebration, it was a message. The empire was strong. The king was glorious. His wealth was beyond question. His command reached across nations. But in the middle of that display of power, something happened that power could not control. Queen Vashti was also giving a feast for the women in the royal palace. On the seventh day, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded his officials to bring Queen Vashti before him wearing her royal crown, so that the people and the officials might see her beauty. But Vashti refused to come. Her refusal struck the palace like a crack through stone. In a kingdom where the king's word ruled everything, the queen had said no. Ahasuerus became furious. His anger burned within him. He turned to the wise men who understood the times, men who knew law and judgment, and asked what should be done. Their answer was political, not tender. They warned that Vashti's refusal would become known throughout the empire, and that women everywhere might look with contempt on their husbands. They advised the king to remove Vashti from her royal position and give her place to another. The king agreed. Vashti was removed, and soon a search began for a new queen. Beautiful young women from across the kingdom were gathered into Susa and placed under the care of Haggai, the king's official in charge of the women. They would be prepared, watched, evaluated, and eventually brought before the king. Among them was Esther. She did not enter the palace as one chasing a crown. She did not arrive with a powerful family name or political ambition. She was taken into a system much larger than herself, into a world where beauty could open doors, but danger waited behind them. Before she entered the palace, Mordecai gave her an instruction that would shape the course of the story. She was not to reveal her people or her family. So Esther kept her Jewish identity hidden. Inside the palace, Esther found favor with Haggai. She pleased him and gained his kindness. She was given special care, chosen attendants, and the best place in the house of the women. But favor in the palace did not mean safety. The walls around her were beautiful, but they were still walls. The robes were fine, but they could not protect her from the uncertainty of a king's will. Esther listened. She learned. She carried herself with quiet wisdom. And when her time came to go before the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai advised. There was strength in her restraint. She did not demand. She did not boast. She did not force herself into greatness. Yet favor rested on her. When King Ahasuerus saw Esther, he loved her more than all the other women. She won grace and favor in his sight. He placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The orphan became queen. The hidden girl became the most visible woman in the empire. A daughter of the scattered Jews now sat inside the palace of Persia. But even with a crown on her head, Esther still carried a secret. She was Jewish. And Mordecai remained near the king's gate, watching, listening, and staying close enough to know what was happening in the place where his adopted daughter now lived. If you value this kind of cinematic biblical storytelling, stay with this story until the end, because Esther's rise is only the beginning. And consider subscribing to this channel now, because every subscriber helps this work continue and brings more faithful, immersive Bible stories to life for viewers who want Scripture presented with depth, respect, and emotion. Then, in what first seems like a small detail, Mordecai uncovered a dangerous plot. Two of the king's officials, who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to harm King Ahasuerus. Mordecai learned of the plan and told Queen Esther. Esther reported it to the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be true. The men were dealt with according to the law, and the event was written in the royal records. But Mordecai was not honored. No reward came, no public recognition, no celebration. The king was saved, the record was written, and the palace moved on. But providence did not forget. Sometimes a faithful act appears to disappear into silence. Sometimes the good that is done in secret receives no immediate answer. But the story of Esther teaches that what is recorded and overlooked by men may still be waiting for the exact moment when it will matter most. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted a man named Haman. Haman rose in power above the other officials. The king advanced him and set his seat above the princes who were with him. All the king's servants at the gate were commanded to bow down and pay honor to Haman, and many did, but Mordecai would not bow. Day after day, the king's servants asked him why he disobeyed the king's command. Still, Mordecai refused. When they told Haman his pride could not bear it, Haman had authority. He had position. He had the favor of the king. He had men bowing before him at the gate. But one man standing was enough to fill him with rage. When Haman learned that Mordecai was Jewish, his hatred became larger than Mordecai. He decided that destroying one man was not enough. He would seek to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire kingdom of Ahasuerus. This is how pride turns dark. It begins with wounded ego. Then resentment grows. Then hatred seeks permission. Then evil tries to become law. Haman went to the king not by confessing his personal bitterness, but by presenting the Jews as a problem for the empire. He told Ahasuerus that there was a certain people scattered among the provinces, separated from others, with laws different from the rest. He said they did not keep the king's laws, and that it was not profitable for the king to tolerate them. Then he offered silver for the treasury if the king would permit their destruction. Ahasuerus gave Haman his signet ring. With that ring came authority. A decree was written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring. Couriers carried it to every province. The order was clear. On a certain day, the Jews, young and old, women and children, were to be destroyed, and their possessions taken. The letters went out swiftly, and the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. But the king and Haman sat down to drink. It is one of the coldest images in the story. A death sentence had just been sent across the empire. Families would soon hear the news. Parents would look at their children and understand that a day had been marked against them. A people would weep, fast, and tremble. And while the decree spread, Haman sat with the king as if nothing sacred had been threatened. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city with a loud and bitter cry. He came near the king's gate, but no one clothed in sackcloth could enter it. Across the provinces, wherever the decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and lamenting. This was not distant fear. It was immediate. It was personal. It was written into law. Inside the palace, Esther did not yet know the full reason for Mordecai's grief. Her attendants told her that he was wearing sackcloth, and she was deeply distressed. She sent garments for him to wear, but Mordecai refused them. So Esther called Hathach, one of the king's servants appointed to attend her, and ordered him to find out what had happened and why. Mordecai told Hathach everything. He told him of Haman's silver. He gave him a copy of the written decree. He commanded him to show it to Esther, to explain it to her, and to urge her to go before the king, beg for mercy, and plead for her people. But Esther knew the danger. She sent word back to Mordecai. Everyone knew the law. Any man or woman who went to the king in the inner court without being called could be put to death unless the king held out the golden scepter. And Esther had not been called to the king for 30 days. The crown did not make her safe. The palace did not make her free. She was queen, but even a queen could die if she entered the wrong room at the wrong time without permission. Then Mordecai sent back the words that would echo through generations. He told Esther not to think that because she was in the king's palace, she would escape more than all the other Jews, If she kept silent at that time, relief and deliverance would arise for the Jews from another place, but she and her father's house would perish. And then came the question that has never stopped speaking. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? For such a time as this. Those words reached Esther not as comfort, but as a calling. Her hidden identity could no longer remain only a secret of survival. Her crown could no longer be only a symbol of favor. The palace was not an escape from the suffering of her people. It was the place where courage had to awaken. Esther sent her answer to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Those words were not reckless. They were not empty bravery. They were the words of a woman who had counted the cost and chosen courage anyway. Esther did not know whether the king would receive her. She did not know whether the golden scepter would be extended. She did not know whether her voice would save her people or end her life. But she knew silence was no longer faithfulness. Mordecai went and did everything Esther commanded, and for 3 days the unseen battle began before Esther ever stepped into the court. There was fasting, there was waiting, there was silence, there was the weight of a decision that could not be avoided. Then on the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's hall. The king sat on his royal throne facing the entrance. This was the moment. One step had brought her into danger. One glance from the king would decide whether she lived. The palace that had once lifted her now held its breath around her. And when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. He held out to her the golden scepter. Esther approached and touched its tip. Her life was spared. The king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request?" "It shall be given to you, even to half of the kingdom." But Esther did not reveal everything at once. She invited the king and Haman to a banquet she had prepared. The king commanded that Haman be brought quickly, and they came to Esther's banquet. As they drank wine, the king asked again what her petition was. Again, he promised generosity, even to half the kingdom. Esther answered with patience and strategy. If she had found favor in the king's sight, let the king and Haman come to another banquet the next day, and then she would do as the king had said. Haman left that day joyful and glad of heart. He had been invited to a private banquet with the king and queen. His honor seemed to be rising. His position seemed secure. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai did not rise or tremble before him, Haman was filled with rage again. Still, he controlled himself and went home. He gathered his friends and his wife Zeresh. He spoke of his riches, his many sons, the honor the king had given him, and how he had been advanced above the officials and servants of the king. He boasted that Queen Esther had invited no one but him to come with the king to the banquet, and that he had been invited again the next day. Yet all of it meant nothing to him as long as he saw Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. That is the emptiness of pride. It can possess wealth and still be poor. It can receive honor and still feel insulted. It can stand near the throne and still be tormented by one person who refuses to bow. Haman's wife and friends advised him to build a tall gallows and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then he could go joyfully with the king to the banquet. The advice pleased Haman, so he had it built. But that night, while Haman prepared destruction, the king could not sleep. The timing is everything. A queen had delayed her request. A proud man had built a trap. A faithful man had once been forgotten. And now, in the darkness of night, the king could not sleep. Ahasuerus commanded that the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, be brought and read before him. As the records were read, they came to the account of how Mordecai had uncovered the plot against the king by the two officials who had guarded the threshold. The king asked what honor or distinction had been given to Mordecai for this. His servants answered that nothing had been done for him, nothing. The forgotten record was now remembered. The unrewarded loyalty had reached its appointed hour. At that very moment, Haman entered the outer court of the king's palace to ask the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared. The king asked, "Who is in the court?" The servants told him Haman was there. The king brought him in and asked, "What should be done to the man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman's heart immediately turned toward himself. Whom would the king delight to honor more than me? So Haman gave an answer shaped by his own ambition. He said that royal robes should be brought, robes the king had worn, and a horse the king had ridden, with a royal crown on its head. One of the king's most noble officials should dress the man, lead him on the horse through the city square, and proclaim before him that this is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor. Then the king said to Haman, "Quickly, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Leave out nothing that you have mentioned." In a single moment, Haman's pride collapsed into humiliation. The man who came to ask for Mordecai's death was commanded to lead Mordecai in honor through the city. The man who wanted Mordecai brought low had to proclaim his elevation. The trap was beginning to turn. Think about Esther's courage in this moment. She did not know about the king's sleepless night. She did not know that Mordecai was being honored while Haman was being humbled. She simply did what was right before she could see the outcome. If you were in Esther's place, what would you have done? Leave your answer in the comments, and if this story is helping you see the Bible with fresh depth, like this video and subscribe. It truly supports the channel and helps these cinematic biblical stories reach more people. After honoring Mordecai, Haman hurried home, mourning and with his head covered. He told his wife Zeresh and his friends everything that had happened. Their response was no longer confident. They warned that if Mordecai was of the Jewish people before whom Haman had begun to fall, he would not overcome him, but would surely fall before him. While they were still speaking, the king's servants arrived and hurried Haman to the banquet Esther had prepared. The second banquet began. The king and Haman came to drink wine with Queen Esther. Again the king asked her, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Even to half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." This time Esther spoke. She did not speak first of revenge. She did not begin with anger. She made her plea with clarity and courage. If she had found favor in the king's sight, and if it pleased the king, let her life be granted to her and the lives of her people. Then she revealed the truth. She and her people had been sold to be destroyed. The words changed the air in the room. The king asked who had dared to do such a thing. Esther answered, "A foe and enemy, this wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The secret was unveiled. The queen was Jewish. The decree was not distant policy. It threatened the king's own queen. The man sitting at the banquet was the architect of her people's destruction. Ahasuerus rose in wrath and went into the palace garden. Haman remained to beg Queen Esther for his life, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. When the king returned, he saw Haman near Esther and interpreted it as another offense. One of the king's officials, Harbona, told the king that the gallows Haman had prepared for Mordecai stood at Haman's house. The king commanded that Haman be hanged on it. So the instrument Haman had prepared for Mordecai became the place of his own downfall. The king's wrath was quieted, but the danger was not over. Haman was gone, but the decree still remained. In the laws of Persia, a decree written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring could not simply be revoked. The date of destruction was still approaching. The letters had already gone out. The enemies of the Jews still had legal permission to rise against them. Esther again spoke before the king. She fell at his feet and pleaded with tears to stop the evil plan Haman had devised against the Jews. The king held out the golden scepter to Esther, and she rose and stood before him. She asked that another decree be written, one that would counter the letters sent by Haman. The king gave Esther and Mordecai authority to write concerning the Jews as they pleased in the king's name and to seal it with the king's ring. Mordecai, once ignored at the gate, now stood in royal authority. He wrote letters to the Jews, the officials, the governors, and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia. The new decree allowed the Jews in every city to gather and defend their lives against any who might attack them. The couriers rode out swiftly on royal horses. This time, the message was not despair. It was hope. The first decree had brought confusion and mourning. The second brought light and gladness, joy and honor. In every province and city, wherever the king's command reached, there was gladness among the Jews, with feasting and rejoicing. Mordecai went out from the presence of the king wearing royal garments of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a robe of fine linen and purple. The city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. The man who had once stood outside the gate in sackcloth now walked in honor. The people who had once mourned under a death sentence now prepared to stand for their lives. The day came. The enemies of the Jews hoped to overpower them, but the reverse occurred. The Jews gathered in their cities throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus and defended themselves against those who sought their harm. The fear of them had fallen on many, and the officials of the empire helped them because the fear of Mordecai had fallen upon them. Mordecai became great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout the provinces. The day meant for destruction became a day of deliverance. The sorrow of the Jews was turned into gladness. Their mourning was turned into a holiday. And from that deliverance came the feast of Purim, established as a time for the Jews to remember what had happened. They were to remember the days when their enemies had plotted against them and how the plan was turned back. They were to remember the reversal, the rescue, the relief after terror, the joy after grief. Mordecai recorded these things and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, obligating them to keep these days every year. Esther also gave her authority to confirm the practice. What had nearly become the end of a people became a testimony carried through generations. And Esther's story remains one of the most powerful accounts in Scripture because it does not move the way many other biblical stories move. There is no visible miracle, no prophet calling fire from heaven, no sea split open, no angel standing before the palace, no direct mention of God's name in the text. And yet, everywhere, there is timing. Vashti is removed and Esther is chosen. Esther hides her identity until the moment it must be revealed. Mordecai saves the king, but his reward is delayed. Haman rises, but his pride blinds him. The king cannot sleep on the exact night before Haman comes to ask for Mordecai's death. The record is read at the exact moment it needs to be remembered. Haman is forced to honor the man he planned to destroy. Esther speaks at the appointed time. The enemy's plan is turned back upon himself. The people marked for death are given a way to stand. Some stories show God's power through thunder. Esther shows his providence through silence. And that may be why this story reaches so deeply into the human heart. Because not every season of life feels like a miracle. Sometimes life feels like exile. Sometimes the palace feels dangerous. Sometimes the right decision feels costly. Sometimes the faithful act goes unrewarded. Sometimes the enemy seems to be rising while the righteous are forgotten. Sometimes heaven feels quiet. But quiet does not mean absent. Hidden does not mean inactive. Delayed does not mean denied. Esther did not know the whole plan when she stepped into the inner court. She only knew the next faithful step. Mordecai did not know when his loyalty would be remembered. He only knew it was right to protect the king. The Jews did not know how deliverance would come. They only knew the decree had gone out and that they needed mercy. And still, through human decisions, royal records, sleepless nights, courageous words, and impossible timing, deliverance came. Esther's crown was not only an ornament, it was a responsibility. Her position was not only privilege, it was purpose. She could have remained silent. She could have hidden behind palace walls. She could have told herself that survival was enough. But Mordecai's question pierced the illusion of safety. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? That question does not belong only to Esther. It reaches every generation. What if the place you're in is not accidental? What if the influence you have, however small it may seem, has a purpose? What if the delay you do not understand is part of a larger timing? What if courage is being asked of you before the outcome is clear? Esther's greatness was not only that she became queen, it was that, when the moment came, she chose her people over her comfort, truth over safety, and courage over silence. She did not control the empire. She could not rewrite the law by herself. She could not see the full providence behind the scenes. But she could step forward, and sometimes that is what faithfulness looks like. Not knowing everything, not feeling fearless, not holding all the power, but stepping forward when silence would be easier. The story of Esther teaches that pride can rise quickly, but it cannot outrun justice forever. It teaches that hidden faithfulness matters. It teaches that courage often begins in private before it appears in public. It teaches that a forgotten good deed can become the turning point of history. And it teaches that even when God's name is not spoken, His hand may still be guiding the story. In the end, Esther was no longer only the hidden orphan of Susa. She became the queen who risked everything. Mordecai was no longer the forgotten man at the gate. He became great in the kingdom and sought the welfare of his people. Haman was no longer the honored official. He became the warning that pride and hatred can destroy the one who carries them. And the Jews were no longer only a people marked by a decree of death. They became a people delivered, preserved, and called to remember. The Feast of Purim would carry that memory forward, a memory of reversal, a memory of hidden providence, a memory that the day chosen for sorrow became a day of joy. So when the story seems silent, remember Esther. When courage feels costly, remember Esther. When the wrong people seem powerful, remember Esther. When the timing makes no sense, remember the sleepless night of the king. When a faithful act feels forgotten, remember Mordecai's name written in the records. When fear says to stay quiet, remember the queen who said, "If I perish, I perish." And remember that sometimes the most important moment in a person's life begins with a question they cannot ignore. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? If this story spoke to you, subscribe to Cinematic Biblical Storytelling and help this channel continue creating faithful, cinematic Bible stories for a wider audience. Like the video, leave a comment with the moment that moved you most, and keep watching another story on the channel. There are more lives, more lessons, and more moments in Scripture where courage rises in the dark, and providence is seen only when the story reaches its end.